Hi, buddy. Welcome back. I'm Strategy Professor, and I just really quick wanted to make a video about some of the new information about the Season 11 item changes that are coming up. So, as always, if you enjoy the content, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out a ton on the channel. Come by, check out the stream. Starts around midnight Eastern Standard Time most nights. Usually goes till about 4 a.m. Very friendly, chill community. We'd love to have you. And we release content like this all the time with fresh patch notes, tier lists for every single patch, and then we have tons and tons of coaching sessions, topical guides like best one trick, how to macro better, how to micro better, how to overcome toxicity, does luck exist in League of Legends, what is dodging, when should you dodge. So just tons and tons of guides on the channel, so be sure to check all that out. And I'm going to try to make this just a little bit faster. I know it's a meme on the channel, but I want to see if we can get this done in maybe 15 to 30 minutes, just to give you my thoughts on items. So I will post right now at the beginning. I'll have a link that'll show up somewhere in the upper right of the video about a video that I posted maybe a month or two ago that was about in-depth item changes that I wish would happen, and I gave some examples of the kinds of changes that I think would make for interesting League of Legends. But I'll just kind of give a TLDR and just sort of a revised version of that. I just have really quick my top 5 wish list for items. It looks like they are working towards some of these things now, and why I think it would be a good idea. And ultimately, I think they will probably go in the direction of most of these. The Mythic reveal, which is what most people are talking about, you know, the thing that Riot released with the video in the client that all the all-capsers are talking about. And then kind of the behind the scenes that less people are talking about with this screenshot where they revealed certain item icons. And I'm going to try to get as much information as I can out of those icons, give you guys my thoughts on it, if it reveals anything about the direction they might be taking items, if that reveals anything that we might expect from some of these changes moving forward. So that's going to kind of be the 3 steps of this video. So let's start off really quick with my rework wish list. So items in League of Legends overall I think are in a pretty solid state right now. I don't think it's terrible, but I think there definitely are some things that they could do to improve how items work. So number 1 on my list is better parity with item power spikes. So if you've never thought about this deeply, then perhaps you should when you're building your items. But this certainly comes to the forefront when you're thinking of high level play, especially competitive play. But it even trickles down to all levels of play, is that certain items allow for a faster power spike and just earlier snowballing by certain champions. And you see this all the time. Anyone who can abuse an item that is cheaper than the curve in a solo lane. So for example, anyone that can build something effectively that's about 2,500 gold or less when someone else is building a 3,000 gold item is usually going to get a major edge, and often either that champion will get nerfed or the item will get nerfed. So you see this happen really fast with enchanter items, right? When you have something like a Janna top lane or a Sona top lane, part of what makes those champions really oppressive and why they got nerfed so quickly when they started to become a little bit meta is because their items are so cheap, right? Because they can buy things like Athene's Unholy Grail for 2,100 gold, or they can buy stuff like Ardent Censer for 2,300 gold. And that's why, you know, those got nerfed really quickly, and that's why Riot's always very careful about things like Karma in the middle, or Lulu in the middle, or even Ivern in the jungle, is because they buy those cheap items. You also saw that with some of the jungle items, right, that can be really cheap and can be really effective. And that's why they limited the jungle items so that laners can't get it. So you don't have laners getting things like Runic Echoes, or you don't have laners getting, you know, some of these other jungle items that they've tried to sneak in and get in the past. So they limit it only for junglers, and they only allow junglers to get it once. So they're very, very careful with things that are very cost efficient because price matters on items. So one of the surviving items that you see a lot that gets abused is Proto Belt, and that's because it's 2,500 gold, it's very cheap, it breaks the curve, and it can make certain champions like Echo, like Fizz, and just some of these other champs that don't need mana items hit their power spike faster, start snowballing, start roaming, and start gaining advantages. So you see this also as being pretty problematic historically with tank support items. So stuff like Knight's Vow, and to a lesser extent Zeke's, will end up getting used in other lanes, and so they had to nerf those items repeatedly, or even just the gold generation item for support, right? You saw many solo laners trying to run Frostfang, and that was part of that strategy top lane with the Sona and Soraka, was that they wouldn't even hit minions because it was just more gold efficient to hit the enemy and stack those Frostfang stacks up. So price matters, power spikes matter, and certain items and certain strategies require more gold to come online than others. And the pace at which not only the raw gold where you get the items, but the back timings matter so much. And you see that a little bit with Manamune right now, and there's kind of this debate about that, and people will get that because it's a super cheap item for 2,400 gold that becomes very powerful later, but does have a bit of a weaker power spike early if you can't overcome that. And so certain champions will be able to hit these power spikes faster because they have more modular items, which gives them better back timing. So for example, let's say that you get an early kill in lane, you have 800 gold, and you have a choice. You can push the lane and get a recall, or you can stay in lane and try to save up for a BF sword. Well, if you can push and recall and get like a couple of long swords, you're going to be able to come back to lane and exert even more power on the enemy, push your advantage, gain tempo, maybe fight for scuttle, maybe get an early dragon. You're going to have that power. You're going to be able to translate that into items and express that, on the map to gain an advantage to win more games. Right? But if you have to sit around and wait on a BF sword because you don't have enough gold and it's going to slow you down, and your Infinity Edge requires a BF sword, which has no smaller components, and you're behind, even if you have that kill, they might actually come back to lane and be stronger than you for a few minutes there because maybe they bought a longsword on their first back, or even just a couple of extra potions after they died. They come back to lane you haven't bought yet because you're saving up for a BF sword, and so they're actually stronger than you, even though you got the kill, just because your power spike timing, your back timing is so bad because you're waiting for a BF sword. Or if they're able to force you into a bad back, right? So if they force you to back with, something like 1,100 gold, then you have to settle for a pickaxe instead of a BF sword. And if they're slightly ahead, if they have gotten maybe 6 or 7 more CS in the lane and they're able to get a BF sword, you're tremendously behind because now you're coming back to lane with 200 gold that you weren't able to spend. So it's basically like you don't even have those 200 gold. It's like you're down an additional 10 CS just because of that timing, just because you missed that very narrow window. Or maybe you got ganked by the jungler. Maybe you almost had your BF sword, but you got ganked and camped by the jungler. You had to back at a bad time. You can't get your BF sword. Or maybe you overstay, right? You're like, man, I just need one more wave. Even though the enemy just backed and got their BF sword, I've got to stay for one more wave to get my BF sword. You have a late back timing, they get priority in the lane, then they get a free dragon. Just because you weren't able to back earlier. You didn't have as much of a choice. So I don't want to hit on that too much, but it's a very big deal, especially at higher levels of play. Are these different back timings and different tempo advantages you can get based strictly off of your items. So most champions will try to get the items that are as modular as possible a lot of times, that allow the most flexibility and the most different options whenever you have your back timings. So what does that mean? What would I do with this to add parity? Well, I would make most small items, and this is just very rough, but about 500 gold. So that, and by small item, I mean single component to something else, right? So you should be able to progress your build with an item that's at least 500 gold. So, I'm thinking stuff like Amp Tome. Longswords are a little cheaper. You could think about longswords. You could actually give longswords more AD, like 5 more AD, and make them a bit more expensive if you wanted to make them about 500 gold. So longswords, Amp Tomes, Ruby Crystal, Ruby Sapphire, all of those types of things. Should be roughly 500 gold. Then I think a lot of combined items, and once again, this is very rough, but just bear with me on the theory here. Combined items should be worth something like 1,500 gold, right? So something that where you have 2 small items, 2 long swords that build into a Serrated Dirk, or 2 amp tomes that could build into a needlessly large rod, for example, or an amp tome and a ruby crystal that can build into either Haunting Guise or Morellonomicon. All that stuff should be around 1,500 gold. So, 1,400, 1,600, or with the small items, 400, 600, just something in that range, right? But there should not be small items like a BF sword that's 1,300 gold that has no smaller components, or a pickaxe, or a needlessly large rod. So we'll talk about that here in a second. But small single items, 500, combined 1,500, utility items should be about 2,500. So this is stuff that's going to have weaker stats, but really interesting actives or passives to give you more utility, like a Zanya's, like a Banshee's Veil, that type of stuff. A legendary item, as they're starting to call it, sort of with their terminology, would be sort of a big ticket item that really gives you a massive power spike that's gonna take a while to work towards it, right? So like your Infinity Edge, your Death Cap, just any of those big ticket items that are really going to be huge once you complete them. And then you have your Mythic items, I think should be around 3,500 gold. And we'll talk about the Mythics here in a second. But those are basically build defining items. You can only get one of them and they amplify all of your other items. So it should be something massive that you're working towards that's going to take a while to complete. So combined items should be made out of 2 smaller items. So you have like 2 amp tomes, 2 long swords, that type of thing. Utility items should be 1 combined item plus 1 small item, so like a Haunting Guise plus an Amplifying Tome. Legendary items should be 2 combined items, so like maybe a Haunting Guise plus a Needlessly Large Rod or something like that, which we'll talk about here in a second. And a Mythic item should be 2 combined items plus a small item, so like 2 Needlessly Large Rods plus an Amp Tome, or 2 BF Swords plus something else. And so I think some of the key changes are making those really expensive items build out of smaller items. So when you have suboptimal back timings, you can still progress your build. You're not going to get snowballed on as much, or you're not going to get punished because you're playing a champion that requires a BF Sword instead of a Serrated Dirk. It's going to open up the viability of a whole lot of different champions. So BF Sword should be something like Longsword plus 600 gold. Pickaxe should be Longsword plus 125 gold. Or you could do like Longsword plus 500 gold-ish. Needlessly Large Rod should be Amp Tome plus Amp Tome, 330 gold. Or Blasting Wand should be Amp Tome plus a little bit extra. Or just Amp Tome plus 400 gold or something like that, right? So there should not be these like huge gaps where you're going to be extremely weak if you have to take a bad back. And they've explained in the past, they're like, oh, it's very interesting because you have to choose, are you going to stay for that extra wave for the BF Sword, or are you going to go ahead and back and take something less valuable? I agree that, like, in theory, that would create interesting choices with the big items. Do you get the BF Sword, or do you settle for a pickaxe or a crit cloak? I can see the reasoning behind that, and I think it's cool, but the problem is it's not at parity. It's not even with the other items. A lot of the more modern itemization reworks have much better build paths, right? When you think about the lethality item reworks that they've done, you think about the enchanter item reworks they did a couple of years ago. Those are much better. They're much more modular, which we'll talk about that here in just a second, but they're going to be much more modular, and they're going to allow for a much friendlier build path, right? Because when you think lethality is kind of the poster child for this, you can just grab a ton of longswords as lethality, and then eventually you can build them into something useful, right? So not only do you have a nice sort of progression build path into Serrated Dirks and Caulfield's Warhammers and stuff like that, but you can actually change mid-build, right? Which fits into that modularity we'll talk about here in a second. And then it's the same thing with Forbidden Idols, right? If you're an enchanter, you can go ahead and get a Forbidden Idol. It builds out of little fairy charms, and then if you want to build into an Ardent Censer, you can get an Amp Tome, or you can get a Ruby Crystal and build either Redemption or Shirelias. So you have all of these small components, right, that are, often somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 to 600 gold. And then you can build those out into those items, and you can change mid-build, right? So you can have a Serrated Dirk and say, hey, you know what? I wanted Dustblade, but now I'm getting stomped in my lane. I want to be able to roam better, so I'm going to change it into Ghostblade. Or you can have Forbidden Idol and say, hey, I was going to get a Redemption, but our team fight's not looking that good. Our Amumu's super far behind, but our Darius is really far ahead, so I'm going to get a Shirelias so that we have better engage. So you can kind of make that call mid-build and adjust to get the kind of item that's going to best suit the needs of your team. So you can adjust on the fly. You don't have these cookie-cutter preset builds with lethality or with enchanters most of the time. You have a bit of flexibility, and a lot of it comes down to they have a really good progression of small items to combined items up to legendary items, right? And so I think if more champions had that, if they had more access to those kinds of things, we'd have a lot more diversity in builds. You'd have a lot more skill expression in your item choices in the game to adapt to different situations. So I think that they really should look at lethality, and they should look at the Forbidden Idol item set for enchanters and see if they can do that for more champions out there. So in theory, once again, this would be power neutral. It wouldn't say that like Infinity Edge has to be more powerful or BF Sword has to be more powerful. It would just say that it has a much more friendly build path and it's much more modular, right? So it can work around different back timings, adjust to different situations on the map, and you can change your items mid-build potentially to adapt to different things that are going on in the game. Other things that I would like to see would be more options for powerful item actives with less stats. So I think ways that they've done this really well would be with the redemption sort of change to where it has a really big hit and it scales especially with other plus healing and shielding items. But it's really weak if you miss your redemption. It has terrible base stats on it. So if someone jumps out of the redemption or you aim it improperly or something like that, if you don't get a lot of value out of the active, it's terrible. Same thing with Mikhail's. If you forget to use that cleanse in a team fight, it's terrible, right? Because the stats are really bad. Same thing with Locket. Same thing with Quicksilver Sash. You have to use the actives to get good value out of them. It's not guaranteed. It's risky. You might lose it wrong, use it wrong. Your teammates may not play around it correctly. So it's high risk, high reward for skilled play using item actives. And I think that that's something they should strive for more. I think they did it very well with those items. I think Banner of Command, in theory, should be something like that where you can get something or just some kind of macro item. It could be ZZ Rock Portal, could be Banner of Command, but something that can put pressure on waves and get you priority, but it's going to be a really weak team fight item. So for example, if Banner just promoted one of the cannons to a super minion, you could put that in a side lane, but then it would have like pretty terrible tankiness, not a lot of AP and that kind of thing, right? So you're paying a very heavy price for getting that side lane pressure, but that's there if you want to work around that kind of macro strategy with your team. So I think that's really interesting when there's very clear trade-offs, and that kind of gets to the next one. More clarity and item purpose. Why are you getting this item? There should be a very specific reason that you're getting this item, and there should be other choices that would be better in different situations. Ideally for every champion, right? So you should say, you know what, I'm going to be better at doing this, but I'm going to be a lot worse at doing this other thing. I have the option to do this other thing with this champion. It's a legit build, but I'm choosing to go this way because I want to have this sort of impact on the game, right? So example of this done really well, redemption. Like I said before, you're opting into team fights, right? If you get redemption, you're assuming your team's going to group up and you're going to get a lot of value out of that item active. But that's really bad if your team decides to split up and do a 1-3-1 split push in two different lanes, or if you have a bunch of assassins that are roaming around trying to pick people off and get kills, or if there was another option that could have been stronger. So if you have a 5-0 Twitch, and if you got Ardent Sensor and just beefed up the DPS on your Twitch, maybe that would have been the better play to help you get more damage in those team fights. Or maybe Shirelia's would have been better because you could help your Hecarim engage or your Olaf stick to people or something like that. So there are clear choices. Or Mikhail's, if they have an Ashe or they have a Leona, maybe it would have been better to get the Mikhail's to get that cleanse for your ally. So I think that, once again, the Enchanter items are really well balanced in the sense that there are very clear choices why you would want certain items over the others, and you have to make strategic trade-offs, right? You're losing out on other potential items that could have been better, but you're making that choice. You're committing to a certain line of play. So I think that Redemption's a good example of that. A really bad example of that is Death's Dance recently. It's just good at everything, right? It has defensive stats on it. It has lifesteal on it. Has damage delay on it. It has CDR on it. It has pretty respectable AD. So it's just kind of got everything. It's just a bloat of different stuff that's just offensive and defensive, and it's just a train wreck of an item, right? And another example of this is like the Ginsu's Rageblade. It's like, what the hell is that item? You're looking at it, right? It's got magic pin on it. It's got physical pin. It's got AP. It's got AD. It's got attack speed. It has this scaling with like on-hit damage where you have to be in combat for 5 seconds to get maximum value out of it. And then if you happen to have other on-hit items or interactions as well, every third hit triggers them twice. It's trying to do like 3 or 4 different things, right? So it's just not very clear in its purpose. So people usually just get it because it's like, okay, I have on-hit stuff. I have Blade of the Ruined King or Muramana. I want the on-hit, so I'm going to get it. And they'll get it on champions that just don't even want the AP, right? You'll get it on Vayne, for example, and it just feels bad because it's just like a waste, but you want the on hit. So I think just clarifying, what is this item trying to do? Who's the intended audience? And don't try to make items that are good on everybody. Make every item at least somewhat situational or work towards a specific playstyle or a specific build. So I would like to see that. It looks like they're working towards that a bit more. And then I think in general, they would also benefit pretty heavily from more items being gated for certain roles, and they tried to do this more. So what that means is certain items, especially low economy items, so stuff that's cheap for enchanters and early jungle items, should be restricted to those roles, and they need to find a way to keep them in those roles more so that you can give power to champs that aren't getting all of the gold, so you can work around certain strategies. Like we want our ADC to get a lot of the gold, we want our mage to get a lot of the gold, so therefore Soraka doesn't need to farm anything. Or therefore our jungle Nunu doesn't need to get a lot of farm because he's going to be effective with a lower amount of gold, potentially. And so I think that that's an interesting choice. So I've always said that they should have it, certain items where the actives only become active or only become available whenever you have completed the quest item. So once you get to the tier 4 quest item, or maybe even the tier 2 quest item, then that's when you would get it. So something like Redemption, for example, would only turn on once you have completed a tier 2 gold item. So Ardent Censer would be a great example of this as well. You know, they could say, hey, this is only going to turn on once you complete your quest item. And that way you can't have champions in other roles getting that. Now, it could also be once you complete your smite in the jungle or something like that. If you want junglers to be able to have access to that item as well, you could make that call. But that would keep it out of the hands of solo laners, right? Then you wouldn't have to worry about your top lane Vladimir rushing Shurelya's, and you wouldn't have to completely rework the item because of Shurelya's, or because you're worried that Singed is going to abuse Banner of Command or ZZ Rock Portal if you want that to be an option for supports. Or you're worried that, your mid lane Karma is going to abuse Athene's Unholy Grail or Frostfang. Or you're worried that some tank is going to be abusing Knight's Vow, potentially, or Gargoyle's Stoneplate out of the jungle. So I think that would be nice. So some better ways of creating support-only stuff. They've worked on that a little bit with the Frostfang and limiting the gold generation items to where other people have to be around for them to work. And they've tried to do that with tank items too, to where Knight's Vow only works if you're around other people. Zeke's only works if you're around other people. So that's how they've kind of had a janky way of doing it, of saying, hey, this is only for supports. But I think that they could clarify and do that a little bit better and just tie it explicitly with the completion of certain quest rewards for the warding items. And then they need to do more like ranged only and melee only items, and then that would open up diversity. So where this is probably the strongest is with like AD carries or other ranged champions that might benefit from lethality, but they can't make some of the lethality items too strong because the assassins are going to do too much damage with it, right? So you can't make something like Ghostblade, for example, too strong, even though that would be a really cool utility item, on someone like a Misfortune, so that she can compensate for her lack of mobility and reposition to get a good ult off or something like that. Like, it's a cool item for Misfortune, but if you make it too strong, it's going to be OP on Talon or Zed or something like that that's going to be roaming a lot more often than Misfortune probably will. So a good way to fix that, to allow range to have decent ways to buff up their spells, so you get certain casters like Varus or Misfortune or even Jhin, just stuff that really wants to do a lot of damage off their abilities. You give them more opportunities for that, but you keep it away from assassins by making more ranged only stuff, kind of like Hurricane. You could also do melee only stuff like they do with the Ravenous Hunter and the Tiamat type of items. So anyways, I would like to see those as well. Okay, so I know I went on there a little bit too long. Let's talk about the actual items here for a little bit. I just get excited talking about this, and I think they are going through some of these things, but they did a mythic item reveal here, and I'll see if I can pull some of these up on the screen for you. Just really quick over here. So the concept is not new. They were kind of marketing this as a new concept. It's basically just taking Infinity Edge and Death Cap and things like that to the next level and creating scaling items that encourage certain styles of gameplay. So those are just raw stats. Infinity Edge makes crit better, Death Cap makes AP better, and that's all good. but I think they're trying to create a certain style of play that complements different game styles. So more than just stats, and I hope they do more than just stats, but a certain style of play for certain champions that'll create more diversity among roles. So they were talking about AD carries because AD carries are usually the least diverse role. It's almost always a ranged, squishy, physical damage dealer that often has very little choices in terms of itemization. Some of the more modern ones have more choices, right? So things like Kaisa will have more choices, but in general, that's been a long-term problem with AD carry. So they're trying to address that a little bit. So some examples they have are the Crimson Shield Bow here. So pretty good stats. I mathed this out on stream the other day. It's about 100% efficient. It's like 3,300 gold worth of stats. And then you also get basically 3 different passives with it. You get a shield, so almost like a Phantom Dancer shield. Hopefully that won't stack with Phantom Dancer or Asterix Gauge. And then you get 20% increased lifesteal for 8 seconds. And all of your other legendary items, so all of your 3,000 gold-ish items, are going to be plus 8 armor and plus 8 magic resist. So that is very, very strong. It's OP. This one is still going to be pretty OP. I don't remember the exact math on it, but it was something like, it was going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 200+% efficient. Just by comparison, Infinity Edge right now is somewhere around 118% efficient, and it's one of the most efficient offensive items out there. And there are lots of items that are way less. So like Rapid Fire Cannon, not including its range, and sort of its on-hit burst, is about like 80% efficient, as are most of the Zeal items. So this is really over the top, but I like the idea somewhat where you could get something. It should be sacrificing more damage probably. I mean, it does only have 50 AD on it, so I guess it's kind of sacrificing the damage there. But they should maybe knock the stats a little bit if it's going to have passives that are that strong. So I'm all for items being unique and doing cool stuff like that, like giving you survivability, but it shouldn't also be like a really heavy damage item. Because they said before that they don't want they want mythics to be relatively weak rush items. So kind of like the approach they were taking to Infinity Edge when they had that terrible rework a couple of seasons ago. They don't want you to buy it first or to feel compelled to buy it first every time. They want it to be something that you can just buy other items, normal items. You know, you could start with Infinity Edge and then kind of feel out and see, okay, do I want more survivability? Do I want more mobility? You know, what do I want to do after this? So ideally, I think a mythic is supposed to be something that would come in as a second or a third item once you've kind of adjusted in the game and figured out how you want to approach the game a little bit more, I think. Now, people might still rush them. I don't know. I mean, with how OP they are, they probably will rush them. But if they dial it back a little bit and really put more power in this mythic passive and really encourage you to have other items first to get the full value, then, you know, maybe that's worth considering. So a great example of this would be something like Death Cap right now. Like, almost nobody rushes a Death Cap first item because you don't get a lot of value out of that, right? You don't have other AP items to get that extra scaling, and it's not going to be very efficient, and it's super expensive. Infinity Edge, people still rush it because it's still a super strong item early on a lot of other champs. So that one's not executed as well, but a lot of that's just because there aren't a lot of other good AD items to rush for a lot of champs. So I mean, other than like Manamune and Bork and stuff like that. But as far as like heavy hitting crit, you don't really have options. You have to get Infinity Edge. So anyways, I like the idea. Stats are over the top, but it's interesting on the Shield Bow. It's basically like a better Phantom Dancer. And then you have Behemoth Slayer. Now this one is just mega OP, and I don't like this idea at all. Every third attack does a crap ton of true damage. I don't even like this is going to have to be nerfed way the hell down. I mean, this would be like really strong even if it was like 30 to 100 true damage, especially with the 30% bonus AD scaling. That's just nuts. Like, true damage is insanely powerful. I was hoping they would have learned their lesson from Conqueror and from some of these other iterations of true damage that they've done in the past. True damage should not be something that everyone is given access to through items or through runes. It should be very heavily controlled and balanced around specific champions and their kits, because the problem with true damage is it's good against everything. Like, they usually try to classify it as being good against tanks. This is tank breaker, that type of stuff. And so that's how they market true damage. But it's better than that because it's good against squishies as well. Because the main way you can try to counteract true damage, the only way in fact, is to build more health and just hope they don't kill you. because resistances don't work, right? Or to have some kind of really big shields or something like that. So it's a terrible idea for a stat. A much better way to do that is to do maximum percent health. That gets tanks while not hurting squishy champions that much more. So I wish they would change this to maximum percent health or some kind of like armor penetration or something like that. So turn this into like a Last Whisper-esque type of item. So every third hit, might shred 30% of their armor for 3 seconds. So almost like, I guess that's basically what Black Cleaver does. But anyways, I just don't really like this idea. I definitely do not like the true damage. But if they want to do something like that, they could do percentage max health. But then is this going to be too strong if you combine it with something like Gensu's Blade of the Ruined King on someone like a Vayne or something else that already has a lot of that in their kit? It might be a little over the top. So I don't like the idea. I think that AD carries are already, for the most part, really good at shredding tanks, particularly AD carries who attack a lot, to take advantage of this. Because usually the ADCs that aren't going to be very good at going against tanks are things that don't attack a lot, that have most of their damage is built into their abilities, right? So stuff like Ezreal, stuff like Draven, stuff like Jhin are just naturally not going to be as good against tanks because they just don't attack as fast. But these things that are attacking really fast, that get multiple hits, they're already getting Gensu's most of the time. They're usually getting Blade of the Ruined King, stuff like that. It's something like a Vayne. So they don't need this as much. The other champs who would need to break tanks would rather have some kind of armor penetration on their abilities, right? So they can get through the tanks faster, so that Ezreal's Q can do more damage to tanks, or Jin's like fourth shot can do more damage to tanks. So the design's okay, but I think this is empowering something that's already really strong. But I like the idea that they're trying to say, look, I want more damage, especially against tanks. Can I get an item for that? So like Blade of the Ruined King 2.0. And then Gale Force, I think this is potentially the best one, and this is the most interesting one in my mind, where you're pretty much giving a little proto belt to AD carries. So it's a decent item, like it's got 100% stats on it, but it gives you a little jump that would presumably be on a 1 minute or 2 minute cooldown. Proto belt's on like a 40-second cooldown, but basically a proto belt where you can reposition. I don't know why it does that little bit of extra damage. That does kind of worry me, just because I think that assassins might be able to take advantage of that, right? Like, Fizz getting to get up closer to kill you, or Kha'Zix getting closer to kill you if they take an item like this. I don't think they probably would, because it's got critical strike and attack speed, but maybe, that ability to gap close to get a free flash is very, very strong. So that's why it worries me a little bit that assassins might actually take advantage of this item. I can't think of anything. Maybe like a Yasuo or something to get closer. Some of these melee champs to be able to get closer and burst people out. Yasuo or Yone or something like that. Could potentially find this to be a really, really compelling item. So I don't know. It's interesting, but I'm not sure that this needs to go on an item that has critical strike, right? It just feels like some more kind of utility might be good. But I like that. You need more mobility. You're on something squishy like a Jinx or like a Twitch or whatever. You have an option. You can basically get a free flash, but the stats would be much weaker, and there would be a much bigger trade-off. And you wouldn't do this like weird burst damage with it. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me personally. I think, once again, that's just not very clear why you would get this item. It's just doing too many things. It's too reminiscent of kind of Death Dance-esque balancing, where you're just putting too many good things on one item. But I think that's probably the closest thing to doing something unique that can change the playstyle of AD carries around to overcome some of the potential weaknesses against specific team comps, like different hook champions, your Blitz, your Ashes, and stuff like that. So I think something like that would be good, but maybe just execute it a little bit better. Then they had this Cursed Helm, which is OP, at least the way that it looks. Even if it just gives 20 armor and magic resist, and it sounds like you could get more than that, so it could stack up to like 40 or something over time. It's too strong, but I do like the idea of something that gives some resilience the longer you're in combat. But you do have to be very careful around certain AP tanks, and they'd have to balance this out, like Maokai, who have pretty good AP ratios. but giving him something like this might be a little over the top, especially when combined with Leandri's. So you gotta be a little careful, but I do like the idea there. Okay, so let me just give some real quick thoughts before we run out of too much time here. And I think this is something that's going to be relatively unique. I haven't seen a lot of other content creators talking about this too much yet. But just looking at this screenshot, and I have it pulled up over here, that Yetter sent out, going over, or it just kind of shows the icons, but it shows icons and it shows prices. So I was just going to speculate a little bit here about what I think some of this could mean, and why I like some of it and why some of it might not be as strong. Okay, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit here. There we go. Okay. Now we can see it. So they showed battering ram, which is kind of, you know, whatever. If you look at that battering ram over here on the side, dealing physical damage grants you basically a black cleaver. So this is almost like Trinity Force for tanks. So it gives you the movement speed, the rage from Phage. It gives you the spell blade from Sheen. And then it allows all of your other legendary items to have an extra 6% tenacity and slow resist. And then it's got 40 AD and 500 health on it. So pretty good for bruisers that want to be able to stick to people and still do some decent damage. So it's basically a Trinity Force for tanks. I like the idea. Sounds cool. But that's just an example of, you know, some of the new mythics that they have here. Let's talk about some of the other stuff and what could be coming up. So once again, super speculative. We don't know for sure. They might release details down the line. But here are just some of my thoughts based on these screenshots, and what that might sort of say about the different itemization that's coming down the line. Okay. So it looks like there's at least 11 mythics. So that looks cool. And each one of them, at least the ones that I know about, seem like they are promoting a different type of playstyle for champions. So I think that that looks very promising so far. So they've decided to make a Trinity Force a thematic item. What I would assume that would be for would be, you know, some kind of short burst, short trades. I think that makes a lot of sense. High mobility, short trades on champions. Could be cool. They're making Leandri's mythic item, and that would probably be themed around doing sustained damage over time with magic items. So I think that would be cool. So sort of double down on that. Maybe all of your items, you know, each extra item that you have gives an extra 1% damage that your spells do over time, or something to that effect. I think that would be neat. Now, I don't know what this one is. It's a new icon, but just the way that it looks, how it's kind of shiny and green and just looks sort of wholesome, makes me think it might be an enchanter type of item. So having a mythic enchanter item would be pretty fun, I think. So maybe they are changing like Athene's into something like that. I don't really know. It's just speculative, but it is cool that you could, in theory, have something that's big ticket for an enchanter. You got your Ludens, which I assume would be sort of for your mana hungry poke champions. I don't know what this skirmisher or spectral saber would be. Maybe for mobility and assassins. Then you have Stormrazor. This is probably for Energizer builds, I would assume, with like shivs. They tried to do that before, where it has certain on-hit properties, like every so often, every 100 charges, you get extra range, or it does the chain lightning, or it slows people, and you can combine all of that to have these really like powerful sort of single moments as an AD carry. This is an old school item. It's Madrid's Blood, or I don't remember exactly what it wasn't exactly Madrid's Blood Razor. That was the little fist thing, but it was Blood Razor, maybe is what it was called. And they already have that as a jungle enchantment right now, but I believe that that would be something like attack speed on hit type of builds for melee, I would assume. So that might go with Gensu's. It could also be some kind of like hard farm jungle item, like the old Devourer or whatever it used to be called. So maybe some kind of hard farm item out of the jungle, or an on hit type of item out of the jungle, which could be pretty neat. Then you have Righteous Glory, which presumably is, you know, and they've increased the price a lot on that. It's only $2,600 on live, or maybe $2,650 on live. So I assume they're going to beef it up with a lot more stats and make the engage much more powerful. Maybe you get something like an Aftershock-esque kind of bonus whenever you engage, but making something that is really strong for engaged tank type of champs, I think would be cool. I don't know about these other ones. This one looks like an assassin type of item here. So I'm not sure about these, but I think that it's cool that they, at least the ones that I can sort of identify, are promoting a different kind of playstyle. So I think that looks really promising. Now, as far as missing items, and they said they were going to remove about a third of the items out of the game, and they said they're going to replace it with a third new item. So it sounds like they don't want to add a ton of new items to the game so that they're not getting too bloated where there's just too many different choices and people can't think straight about what they want to do. So they're just clarifying certain items, clarifying their role to be specific about it. They're removing some stuff and adding other stuff. So stuff that I noticed that does not show up here under the legendary items, the completed items, doesn't mean that it's gone for good, but these are definitely things to kind of pay attention to. I don't see Athene's Unholy Grail. It's possible this could be a new version of that. This new blue item, it's priced as though it's an enchanter item. But I don't know. Also don't see Shirelias. So those are two kind of very conspicuous absences for enchanters. I don't see Locket on here anywhere, although it is possible this is a new icon for Locket at 2,400. That would kind of make sense because that would be priced for tank supports just like Zeke's here as well. So maybe this, and it kind of looks like it would be a shield type of thing. So maybe this is a Locket replacement. I don't see Gargoyle, which is probably fine. It's sort of a fairly toxic item anyways. I don't see Static Shiv, so I see Rapid Fire Cannon, see Hurricane, see Phantom Dancer, don't see Shiv. So not really sure what that would mean. Now, a lot of people don't even get Shiv. There's some people for extra wave clear, but maybe they're going to make one of these items, maybe the Blood Razor, whatever, for clearing waves. And I don't see GLP, which is an interesting item, but honestly, it does overlap with Luden's quite a bit. So maybe it's okay if they get rid of GLP, or maybe they're building it into one of these other items. So those are kind of the most conspicuous absences that I noticed. Now, the more exciting things are some stuff that they changed and added in there, and some notable price changes as well. So they, the one that jumped out to me right away was Banner of Command. So I think there is a way, like I said earlier, that you can balance this item to where it's not OP for pro. And the main thing is, if someone gets there to stop it, it's done, right? You can't just sit there and siege with it and automatically get towers, right? Like the old Banner of Command, when they took it out of the game, it was like empowered by Baron, and it couldn't be damaged by magic damage abilities, and it killed towers in like 6 shots or something like that. Like, it was just ridiculously OP with almost no counterplay. That's bad gameplay design. But I think if it just turned one minion into a super minion, that could be cleared out, right? It could be cleared out by someone else. But it could build up a slow push in a side lane to give you pressure that you need to maybe threaten Baron, or to get the enemy team to split up and quit A-ramming, so that your assassins can pick people off. Like, it just opens up a lot of macro options to basically have an extra split pusher in a side lane that can be stopped easily if someone actually goes over there, but it forces the enemy team to split up and deal with that. I think that's really cool. I think that's a great idea. The main key here is it should be bad if the team is there to answer it. You shouldn't be able to play around it on a siege. And the stats should be relatively bad on it. You should pay a very heavy price for having that ability to get a free split pusher in a side lane. Or get a split pusher you're paying a heavy price for in a side lane would be a better way to put it. I like that they are putting Zhonya's and Banshees back at 2,500 gold. I think that's a fantastic idea. They changed this around back in the day because people were rushing these items too much, and it was creating really weird like metas and matchup problems in mid lane. So I think that, once again, like I was saying up top, they should be relatively weak. Like, they should be low AP items, maybe 50 AP each or something like that. And you should pay a heavy price for those actives, or the passive, right, for the utility. So I like that idea. Drop the AP, drop the price, just make it all about the utility. Just say, yes, you're losing damage if you get these items, but you're going to be a lot safer. And you can do it for a cheaper price. So I like that. So now it's not just Proto Belt that's cheap. If someone's going Proto Belt, you can say, all right, well, if they're going Proto Belt and they want an early game power spike, I'm going to go Banshees so that I'm going to be able to function better in these team fights. Or I'm going to go Zhonya's, and I'm going to have some outplay potential to whatever they're doing, right? So I like that as a potential answer to Proto Belt. Now, I will say Proto Belt is also missing here, so that's worth mentioning as well. And think it's probably okay to get rid of that item. I think overall it's kind of OP. But I actually, Gunblade, there's no way they get rid of Gunblade, I think, because that one is so key to a lot of other champions. But I don't see any of those types of items. The Gunblade, the Proto Belt, or the GLP, they're all missing. Those Hextech items. So maybe they're somewhere else. Maybe they're built into one of these Mythics, but that is worth noting. Frozen Heart is also a lot cheaper. I like this. I think Frozen Heart has so much potential as an aura item that's sort of an anti-auto attack team, which I think can be very strong. Yeah, you have to be careful with that, but I do like it. It's more utility. Drop the armor on it. Make it available for more people. Rod of the Ages, I like this being cheaper because it's a stacking item, right? So you want to get it early so you can power up on time. So I would like for it to be cheaper and maybe even be weaker earlier on. Have weaker stats in the early game, but scale up to be the same strength over time. So you can get on board faster, you're going to be weaker, but at least you're going to be able to hit that power spike earlier, right? Maybe around 15 to 20 minutes instead of 20 to 25 minutes where you finish it. So I really like that. That also opens up some options for supports or potentially junglers to take this item and get to that power spike a little bit faster. So I think that's a good move with the scaling items. Abyssal Mask also being cheaper. Maybe it'll make this more of a utility item that could open up some possibilities in that price range for certain supports to run this, potentially. And I wish that they would turn this back into something like lowering the resistances for people and maybe widening out the range on it a little bit. So I always just liked Abyssal Scepter. I don't know why they really got rid of that. I know like maybe they're saying it was leading to toxic play styles and things like that, but I thought Abyssal Scepter was pretty good. Almost no one gets Abyssal Mask outside of like Ornn because he gets a special upgrade for it. But anyways, I like that they're trying to make that more of a utility item. Knight's Vow is conspicuously more expensive, so it looks like they're trying to price this away from supports a little bit, make it more of like a stronger mainstream tank item, so that's interesting. They brought in Force of Nature, it seems. So this item back in the day, I'm trying to remember exactly what it did. I remember it was a heavy magic resist item. I think it had health on it. I can't remember the rest, but it looks like they're using that to replace Adaptive Helm. And I also do not see Warmogs in here. So, oh wait, yeah, there's Warmogs. Never mind. Take that back. So yeah, that would be interesting if it was like maybe a magic resist / movement speed item or something. I don't really know, but the fact that that's back is interesting. Mercurial Scimitar actually being a reasonable price is kind of cool, so you can get your Quicksilver Sash and maybe turn it into a reasonable item at 2,900. There was no reason it should have been 3,600 for a completed item. So once again, you need to pay a heavy price for Quicksilver Sash. It shouldn't be free. That shouldn't be a really strong rush item that everybody wants at 2,900, or that would be OP. But I think having a situational build as a Quicksilver Sash, sacrificing sort of your early game power, but being able to recover later on by completing a 2,900 gold item that's actually somewhat decent, could be kind of cool. Less of a feels bad for having to get QSS. Sword of the Divine is very interesting. If you remember this item back in the day, it used to guarantee 3 crits or something like that. So I hope they don't do that again. That could be really OP with some assassins. It's cool if they're doing something that you just activate it and do a bit more damage and it has a bigger trade-off. That could be interesting. Rylai's being 3,000 means it's more of maybe a marquee item. Maybe it has more AP. Maybe it has a stronger slow, something like that. Could be interesting. Trinity being 333, we mentioned that, being a marquee build. And Leandri's being a marquee build. Talked about the potential for a support mythic. And then another sort of engage mythic as well, which I guess could work for supports here. So maybe this is an enchanter mythic and a support tank kind of mythic. So that could be cool. And they have this sort of mysterious 1,000 gold item here. It almost looks like that the ring that people can start with, I forgot what it's called, Dark Seal. So it almost looks like a Dark Seal, but then what would Magi's build out of? So I'm not really sure. Is that like an AD version of Magi's? Are they basically bringing back what was sort of the occult or something like that? Or is this like a QSS for AP champions or something? Like maybe you can get this and then build it into some sort of AP item. So that's kind of interesting. This is Swordbreaker. I forgot. This like has a disarm or something in TFT, Teamfight Tactics. So I don't know. That's where I recognize that icon from. I don't remember anything else having to do with that. Presumably this might build into Blood Razor or be a smaller Blood Razor. Looks like a jungle-esque type of item to me. And then the rest of them, I'm not really sure. This definitely looks like an enchanter, you know, and it's priced like an enchanter type of item. Maybe, like I said, a replacement for Athene's or Shirelia's or something. Looks like it'd be an Athene's type of thing. That's about it. There's this cool kind of nature item. You know, this looks jungle-esque, but I don't know exactly what it would be. So there's a lot of cool stuff here. So I like the direction. Video's running a little long. I did keep it under an hour, so that's good. But I just wanted to give you guys sort of my thoughts. I haven't heard a lot of other content creators yet going over these icons and sort of speculating about what they could mean. But this is meeting a lot of the goals for what I was, you know, laying out and what I like a lot. We don't know about the build paths, so we'll see about that. But it is standardizing different item spikes, right? So like most of these mythics are around 3,400. I was saying 35 would be good. I like that. Most of these kind of big ticket items, these legendary items, are around 3,000, at least a lot of them. Now you do have to be careful with these things where if it's giving out certain bonuses for legendaries, if you can stack cheaper legendaries, that could be an issue. So they'll have to be careful with that, but I like overall where that's going. And it seems like they are adding a lot of kind of clarity, at least to the legendary part, clarity of purpose. And at least based on the pricing, it seems like they are trying to bring back the mid-tier item, right? That's been a lost art recently. They used to have this kind of stuff back in the day, but lately they've pushed people away from the most mid-tier items and said, hey, you have to be expensive. So the fact that they're bringing in, you know, the mid-tier Zanyas, Banshees, Frozen Heart, Rod, Abyssal Mask, probably a stronger Knight's Vow, all that stuff sounds really cool. I think it's all tactical, brings a lot of utility. And it's going to make it a lot more accessible for different builds. So anyways, that's going to be it. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed this. Be sure to like and subscribe if you did, and I'll see you next time.